Smoke hung thick in the air above Harrenhal, curling like a curse around the blackened towers. The castle was a place already burned by dragonfire long ago, but it reeked of fresh death these days. Men hung flayed on the gates, and screams echoed behind thick stone walls every night. Arya Arry, as she called herself to survive, had long stopped dreaming of escape. It had been weeks, maybe months. She couldn't tell any more. Days bled into each other like open wounds. Her list, the names she whispered every night, was now longer. More names, more hate. But she didn't whisper any more. She was too tired, too hungry, too broken. Jaqen never came back. He said 3 lives. She gave him 3 names. After the last one, she waited. Every night she waited for the man with the strange eyes to help her flee, as he promised. But he never returned. Maybe he died. Maybe he forgot. Maybe it was a lie like everything else in this God's damned place. Wheeze had died. Arya remembered his face when the dog tore out his throat. His blood sprayed across her, hot and sickly sweet. She didn't flinch. She just watched. And then she kept scrubbing floors. Now she belonged to Gregor Clegane. The Mountain. She was just another filthy child slave under his boot. He didn't even call her by name, just Rat. That was what she had become, a little rat in the ruins of a dead castle. One morning she was scrubbing dried blood off the stones near the armory when one of the soldiers kicked over her bucket. The water spilled out like blood, and she knew better than to argue. She simply knelt and began again, her raw fingers aching. "You've got a wild look in your eye, girl," a voice said behind her. She turned, slowly. It was Polliver. His face was twisted into a mock grin, and he held her old sword, needle like a toy, in his hands. Arya's stomach turned. "That's mine," she said. Without thinking, Polliver laughed. Belongs to me now. You going to try and take it back?" She looked down. Her hands were too small, too weak, her body too hungry. What would be the point? Gregor didn't allow rebellion. He didn't allow anything. She'd seen what happened to the boy who spilled stew on the floor last week. They'd made the rest of them watch while he screamed. "Didn't think so," Polliver said, tossing her a dirty rag. "Back to work, Rat." As he walked away, Needle hung at his side like a trophy. Arya stared after him until her vision blurred. Her heart thudded loud in her chest, not from fear, but something deeper, something cold and hard. That night she sat alone in the kitchens, her back against the soot-streaked hearth. There was no fire, no warmth, just ash. She didn't whisper names anymore, but tonight she forced her lips to move. "Polliver," she breathed, her voice cracking. "The tickler, Gregor Clegane." Then she said another name, one she hadn't said in a long time, Jaqen Hagar. The silence that followed was deafening. No shadows moved, no magic answered. Arya closed her eyes and tried to remember her father's face, but even that was fading now. Winter crept into Harrenhal like a slow poison. The cold seeped through cracks in the stone walls and wrapped around Arya's bones like chains. Her fingers bled from the cold now, not just from scrubbing. She tied rags around them, but they stiffened and cracked anyway. Her knuckles were always red, always sore. But she didn't cry. She hadn't cried since Lomi died. The other children kept their heads down too. No one spoke unless spoken to. Every step, every breath was a gamble. You never knew if today would be the day Sir Gregor decided to make an example out of someone. One boy, Tom, spoke to her once, a whisper about running. She didn't answer him. The next morning he was gone. Arya found his shoe behind the kennels, soaked in blood and chewed at the heel. She didn't need to ask what happened. Each night she lay curled on the stone floor beneath the kitchens, too weak to shiver. Her body starved, but her thoughts stayed sharp. She watched, she listened, she learned things. The guards were lazy when they drank. Polliver always took second watch, but slept through most of it. One of the cooks sometimes slipped into the armory late at night. She didn't know why yet, but he always came back smelling like oil and old steel. Arya had nothing but her eyes and her memory, but that was enough for now. Then one day something changed. The Lannister soldiers were on edge. Banners shifted on the towers. New men arrived, clean armor, red cloaks. Arya knew what that meant. Someone important. Sure enough, it wasn't long before the mountain lined them all up in the yard. Servants, slaves, rats like her. She wasn't Arya Stark anymore, just a ghost in Harrenhal. "You'll keep your mouths shut, your heads down, and your hands busy," he growled. His voice sounded like it had been dragged across stone. "One wrong move and I'll feed you to my dogs." The nobleman arrived the next morning. Tywin Lannister. Arya nearly choked on her breath. She hadn't seen him in weeks. She thought he was gone forever. But there he was, on horseback, gold shining on his armor like firelight. He didn't recognize her. Of course he didn't. Why would he? She was dirt under his boot, but she remembered him. She remembered how he'd made her serve him wine, speak like a lady, pretend to be something she wasn't. For a while she thought she had fooled him, that maybe he'd sensed who she really was, but let her live anyway. Now she knew better. She had always just been a game to him, a curiosity. Back then she thought he might protect her. Now he wouldn't hesitate to have her hung. Later that day she was sent to the upper chambers with a bundle of linens. She didn't want to go. Anyone going upstairs was either invisible or in danger, but refusing wasn't an option. The guards let her pass with barely a glance. She crept through the hallway, her bare feet silent against the cold stone floor. The castle above smelled better, like wax and meat and fire. It was another world, one she no longer belonged to. As she rounded a corner, voices drifted from the chamber ahead. "My lord, the north is not broken," a man was saying. "There's wolves are wounded, but not dead." "I know," Tywin replied, his tone sharp. "And that girl, Arya Stark, she vanished near here. She may still be alive." Arya froze. Her heart thundered in her ears. She pressed herself against the wall, breath caught in her throat. "She would be valuable," the other man said. "A hostage, a weapon." Tywin gave a quiet chuckle. "If she's still breathing, yes, but Harrenhal eats the weak. I doubt she's lasted this long." Arya backed away slowly, one hand gripping the linen so tight her fingers turned white. So they were still looking for her, still talking about her. She didn't know if it was hope she felt, or fear. That night, back in the darkness of the servant quarters, Arya lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She was done waiting, done hiding. If she wanted to live, if she wanted Needle back, her name back, she'd have to take it all herself, even if it meant killing them all, one by one. The next morning began like any other, grey, bitter, and soaked in misery. Arya moved through the halls with her head low and her hands full of scraps, collecting bones and slop for the dogs. They watched her with yellow eyes and growled low, but they didn't lunge, not yet. Even beasts could smell fear, and Arya had learned how to hide hers. She no longer flinched, no longer looked twice when a scream pierced the air, or a boot cracked. Someone's ribs. But something burned beneath her skin now. They were talking about her. Still. Arya Stark. Not the nameless slave-scrubbing floors and emptying chamber pots. Her. And that meant she wasn't dead yet. Not truly. She crouched by. The kennels, watching the guards swap out on the east wall. It was the same every day. Same faces, same routine. And in that sameness Arya saw her opening. Polliver always cut through the lower corridor to reach the kitchens before midday. He carried Needle openly like it was nothing more than a toothpick. She clenched her jaw. She'd killed before. A boy. A stable hand. Wheeze. She could kill again, but it would have to be quiet. Quick. Clean. There was no Jacon now to do the work for her. No gods to help. Just her. And rats. She slipped into the storage room behind the armory and waited. The air stank of onions and old wood. Her heart thumped as she pressed herself into the shadows. A mouse skittered past her feet, and she didn't move. She didn't blink. Minutes passed. Then footsteps. Polliver whistled as he strolled by, half drunk, dragging a loaf of bread in one hand, Needle hanging off his belt. She stepped out behind him. No hesitation, the shard of broken iron she had tucked into her sleeve found his neck before he could turn. He gurgled, eyes wide, bread falling, and Arya pushed harder, deeper, until the warmth of his blood ran down her wrist like soup. She yanked Needle free. It was heavier than she remembered. She didn't wait for the body to fall. She ran. Not back toward the kitchens, not toward her cell. No. She ran deeper into the ruined corridors, into the old servant tunnels she had once cleaned in silence. There was no plan, just a blade and a storm in her chest. The castle rang with the shout of discovery a short while later. Polliver's dead! Arya crouched in the dark, her fingers tight on the hilt of her sword. Her sword. She could hear boots stomping across stone, hear the panic, the fury. She didn't smile, but something in her stirred, something hungry. She didn't stop hiding that night. She didn't sleep either. She crept from one forgotten corner to the next, staying beneath the floors, behind the walls, in spaces too tight for grown men to follow. There were tunnels here, built before. The dragons burned Harrenhal. Tunnels no one remembered, except rats. Arya wasn't a servant anymore. She was a shadow, a whisper. The next day, the tickler died, boiling water to the face. Then his throat slit in the dark near the latrine. The guards found his body slumped in filth, his tongue swollen, his eyes cooked from the inside. They didn't understand how it happened. But Arya did, because she watched. She waited, and she struck, one by one. She carved the names off her list, with blood. Gregor Clegane grew more violent by the hour. He knew something stalked his men, something silent, And for once the mountain didn't have a face to crush. He doubled patrols, he ordered searches, he had boys beaten for answers they didn't have. But Arya remained smoke. By the third night, even the cooks whispered of a ghost. They said Harrenhal was cursed, and in a way, they were right, because a Stark haunted these halls now. Not a lady, not a child, a blade, a vengeance, a girl who had nothing left to lose. The castle was unravelling. The mountain's grip, once ironclad and absolute, began to crack under the weight of paranoia. His men no longer laughed. They no longer swaggered through the halls like gods among slaves. Now they flinched at every whisper and jumped at shadows on the walls. They were hunters turned prey, and they knew it. Arya watched it happen like someone watching a dying fire. She didn't feel joy, not exactly, but there was a strange satisfaction in the silence that followed every fresh body they dragged out of some dark corner. It meant the castle was bleeding, and she was the knife. She stayed underground, feeding herself on stolen bread, cold stew, and whatever she could grab from the kitchens during chaos. Her hands never stopped trembling, not from fear anymore, but from hunger, rage, and the sheer weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. She wasn't praying, she wasn't hoping. She was surviving and killing. The stories about the ghost of Harrenhal spread fast. The men whispered that a demon had been loosed. Some blamed sorcery. Others thought it was a faceless man come to collect souls. None of them suspected the little girl who once scrubbed floors and kept her eyes on the ground. That was her greatest weapon, being forgotten. But not everyone was blind. Rorge saw her. She had caught his eye once, months ago, back when she was still serving stew and scrubbing dung. He was one of the worst, ugly in face and uglier in soul. A beast even the mountain kept at a distance. His laugh was foul, his hands fouler. He cornered her near the kennels. "You smell like blood," he muttered, sniffing the air. Arya gripped. Needle beneath her cloak, every muscle in her body pulled tight like a bowstring. "You're quiet," he said. "But I remember those eyes. You were with that Jacon fellow, weren't you? Back when Tywin still sat in his pretty little chair." She said nothing. Rorge grinned. "I could give you to the mountain, trade your name for gold, or maybe take what I want first." He lunged, but Arya didn't flinch. She moved. Needles slid through his gut before he even understood. She twisted it once. Then again. Rorge spat blood, grabbing at her, but she ducked away fast and low, like the little wolf she had once been. He collapsed in the hay, groaning, choking, dying. She didn't run this time. She knelt beside him. "Say my name," she whispered, her voice like cold steel. "Say it!" Rorge blinked, confused. Arya Stark of Winterfell. Then she left him to die in the dirt, choking on her name. The next day, panic gripped Harrenhal like frostbite. 3 more soldiers went missing. One was found hanging upside down from a tower window, his insides turned out like laundry. Another had drowned in his own bucket. The third was never found. Gregor Clegane was unravelling. He barked orders, killed a servant for stepping on his boot, and then beat 2 guards bloody for looking nervous. Arya had never seen him scared before, but she could feel it now. Even monsters could feel death breathing down their neck. And Harrenhal was no longer his. That night Arya crept through the crypt levels, where old bones and broken stone kept their secrets in silence. She traced a map of the castle in her head. Every route, every stairwell, every hidden passage. She didn't have an army, she didn't have magic, but she had Needle, she had names, and she had one more to carve from the list. Gregor. But this one wouldn't be easy, not like Polliver, not like the Tickler. Gregor Clegane didn't scare easy, he didn't bleed easy either, so Arya would have to break the rules, break herself if needed, become something even the mountain would fear, something worse than a ghost, a reckoning. It was the darkest night Arya could remember. No stars, no moon, just thick, soupy clouds hanging over Harrenhal like a death shroud. She waited until the 4th bell, when the guards on the east tower usually fell asleep at their posts, half drunk and half dead. The air was cold and wet, and it stank of piss and fear, fear that had soaked into the very stone of this cursed place. Arya didn't wear shoes any more. The silence of her bare feet was sharper than any blade. She had wrapped her toes in cloth to keep them from splitting on the frozen stone. Her hair was chopped to the scalp, her face caked in soot and dirt. She looked more like a creature than a girl. But she still had Needle. She never let it leave her hand now. It slept beside her, ate with her, killed with her. She made her way up the ruined tower through the old servant passage that weaved behind the armory. It was tight and steep, but her body had shrunk from weeks of hunger. She slipped through like smoke. Gregor Clegane slept in the tower chambers now, away from the other soldiers. He didn't trust anyone anymore, not even his own.
Men smart, but not smart enough. Arya reached the 2nd floor and crouched in the shadow of a crumbling archway.
Her breath was shallow. Her heart pounded like war drums in her chest. She crept closer. The mountain's door was thick, barred from the inside. No easy way in. But Arya wasn't looking for easy. She had learned something in the kitchens, something the others hadn't noticed. When the fires burned too hot, the bricks in the wall nearest the hearth sometimes cracked and steamed. It was old stone, softened by dragon fire long ago and made brittle by time. She circled to the outside, climbed the rear balcony, and lowered herself down by an old iron pipe. The wind howled around her, cold as the north. She found the spot. The stone was weak, just like she remembered. She worked fast, silent. Using a broken hook she'd stolen from the forge, she scraped and pried at the mortar between the bricks. Her fingers bled. Her muscles screamed. She didn't stop. She couldn't. After what felt like forever, a brick gave way with a dull, sucking sound. Then another. Arya squeezed through the hole like a rat returning to its nest. Inside, the room was pitch black. She could hear his breathing before she saw him. Gregor Clegane, the mountain, snoring like a dying ox. He lay sprawled on the bed, still wearing half his armor. A tankard of ale rested on a nearby table. His sword leaned against the wall, just out of reach. Arya stepped closer. The air was hot, thick with sweat and rot. Her stomach turned. She raised Needle. Her hands shook, not from fear, from rage, from memory, from everything this beast had taken from her world. She moved fast, knife first, aiming for the throat. But the mountain was faster than she'd ever imagined. He woke. His hand lashed out like a hammer and caught her wrist mid-swing. Arya gasped. He roared. The next moment was a blur of screaming and pain. Gregor flung her across the room like she was made of straw. She hit the wall hard. Her ribs cracked. Needle clattered across the floor. She crawled. Blood filled her mouth. He was on her in 2 strides. "You," he growled, looming over her like a living nightmare. "The rat!" He lifted her by the throat with one hand. Her feet kicked the air. Arya clawed at his fingers, her vision blurred. But then she remembered the shard of iron in her sleeve. She pulled it and jammed it into the side
of his neck, once, twice, again. Gregor staggered, bellowing. Blood spurted like a fountain.
He slammed her down, hard, but this time she landed near the table. Her hand closed around the tankard. She swung. It shattered against his head. He howled and dropped to one knee. Arya crawled to Needle, now slick with his blood. Her hands found
the hilt. She turned and drove it into his eye. The sound he made was not human. His body convulsed. He fell backward. The room went silent. Arya collapsed beside him, gasping. Her whole body ached. Her lungs burned.
She couldn't feel her right arm, but she was alive, and the mountain was dead. The ghost of Harrenhal had killed the monster, but something else had died too. Some small, soft part of her that still believed she was a girl. She wasn't, not anymore. The dawn after Gregor Clegane's death came like a slow bleed of grey light through the shattered windows of Harrenhal. No horns were sounded, no bell tolled for the mountain, just silence, cold and crushing, the kind of silence that warned. Something was wrong, something terrible. His body wasn't found right away. Arya had dragged herself out before the guards rose, slipping back into the old servant tunnels, her body screaming with every movement.
Her ribs ached with every breath. Her wrist was swollen and useless, but she didn't stop. Couldn't. She clutched Needle in her good hand like it was the last piece of herself that still mattered. She didn't stay in the lower kitchens anymore.
That part of her life, of pretending to be a rat, was over. The others whispered of her now, though they didn't know who she was. They only knew the ghost had become death itself. She limped through the old parts of the keep, places even the mountains men had feared to go, tunnels with collapsed ceilings and rooms burned black centuries ago. There she rested, wrapped herself in old blankets and tried not to scream when her body shifted wrong. She chewed stale bread, drank from a leaky barrel, and waited. They found the mountain's corpse 2 days later. His throat was torn, his eye
gouged, his armor dented like it had been hit with war hammers. The rumors exploded. He was cursed. No man could kill the mountain. It was a demon. It was her. Arya smiled once.
Just once. Then it faded, because killing him didn't fix anything. It didn't bring her father back, or her mother, or Rob. Harrenhal was still hell, and now it was leaderless, seething with rage and fear and power, waiting to be seized. And someone noticed. Vargo Hoat returned the day after Gregor's death, dragging his brave companions behind him like a pack of dogs let off their leash. He was different from the mountain, thinner, smarter, but just as cruel. His tongue lolled from a broken jaw, making his words thick and twisted. But his eyes were sharp. He smelled opportunity. "The mountain is dead," he hissed, laughing. "So now, the castle is mine." The Lannister soldiers didn't like it. They protested, but with no clear command, no leader to follow, They eventually gave way. Some left. Some bent the knee. Others disappeared. The brave companions took over like locusts. They painted the halls with filth and blood. They danced on tables and dragged girls from their beds. Harrenhal didn't become free. It became worse. Arya stayed hidden through it all, watching, learning. Again, she knew Vargo would come looking, not for her specifically, but for the ghost, for the one who had brought the mountain low. And he did. He sent men into the tunnels. They found nothing. He tortured old servants, hoping for a whisper of truth. They gave him names, wrong ones. Arya moved like smoke. She hid like a shadow, but she was changing. Her ribs still ached, but she wrapped them tight. Her wrist throbbed, but she trained it back into motion. And most of all, she listened to the guards, the traitors, the cowards and killers. She learned who feared who wanted out, who might help her if fear didn't choke them first. One of the kitchen girls, a trembling thing named Tella, left bread and honey by a crack in the wall one night. No words, just food. Arya took it and left a single word scratched in the stone. Thanks. Later, Cella whispered in the dark near the ovens. They say you're a ghost. Arya didn't answer. They say you killed the mountain. Still.
Nothing. I hope you kill Vargo too. Arya turned to her slowly, and for the first time in weeks, she spoke aloud. I will. After that, the whispers started again. This time, they weren't just stories of fear, they were hopes.
Tiny, trembling hopes. Hope that the ghost would keep killing. Hope that maybe the girl in the shadows would save them all. Arya didn't know how she felt about that. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't anyone's savior. But she had one name left to cross off in Harrenhal, and she had enough strength left for one more kill. Vargo Hoat strutted through Harrenhal like a dog wearing a lion's skin, snarling, snapping, convinced of his own power. But Arya watched from the walls, the grates, the gaps between stones. She saw what he didn't. He wasn't the mountain. He wasn't even Tywin. He was weak. Cruel, yes. Dangerous, yes. But beneath it all, desperate. He didn't command loyalty, only fear. And fear could be turned, broken, exploited. Arya waited. She didn't strike blindly anymore. She watched his
patterns, who he spoke to when he drank, where he slept.
And, most importantly, who he trusted. There weren't many. But one stood out, a thick-necked brute named Ozma, who carried out most of Vargo's punishments. Ozma was cruel, but careless. He drank too much, boasted too loudly. And once, Arya
heard him say something that made her blood still in her veins. She's still here, the little ghost, he slurred near the fire one night. I know it. Hoat's scared shitless. Wants her found. Thinks she's one of them shadow walkers. Laughed ugly and loud. I'll catch her. Bet she's just some skinny bitch in the walls.
Arya didn't blink. She followed him that night. He staggered down toward the wine cellars beneath the armory, cursing and belching. He didn't hear her steps. Didn't feel her behind him. Needles slid under his chin and through his throat before he could even gurgle. She left him there, body twitching in the dark, blood pooling around broken barrels of dawnish red. In the morning they found him nailed to the outer gate, a dagger pinned through his tongue. Carved into his chest with a dull knife were 3 words: Ghosts keep promises. That message broke something in the castle. The brave companions grew skittish. Vargo beat 3 of them for asking to leave, but Arya could feel it. His grip was slipping. She began to show herself now and then. Just a glimpse, a shape in the corridor, a shadow on the stairs, a girl's laugh in the echo of the black tower. Tella helped more now, left clean bandages, a whetstone, even a stolen flask of water. She didn't ask questions, she didn't need to, and Arya, who once had no one, had her first ally in the ruins. Then came the moment, a feast. Vargo ordered one to celebrate his control over Harrenhal, as if declaring himself king of a graveyard. Wine flowed, meat roasted over fire pits. The soldiers drank and shouted and cursed. Some were too drunk to stand. Others brawled in the yard while dogs barked. Arya slipped in. Through the servant doors, she wore a cloak stolen from the laundry, hood up, head down. No one noticed a child moving through the haze of smoke and ale. No one noticed her gloved hand gripping the hilt beneath the cloth. Vargo was drunk, of course, slurring, spitting, waving a leg of meat in the air while he spoke of conquering more. Castles, raising banners, ruling from the riverlands. To ghost, he muttered, laughing. She can't kill me. I'm too smart for a little rat. Arya stood behind him now. She could smell the grease in his hair, the rot of his teeth. She
leaned in and whispered, "I'm not a rat, I'm a wolf."
He turned, slow, confused. Needle flashed once, straight into his open mouth. The blade punched through the soft tissue beneath his jaw and into his brain. He twitched just once and fell, face first, into his feast. The hall went still, utterly, terrifyingly. Still, Arya raised her hood and stepped back. "Vargo Hoat is dead," she said, loud and clear. "This castle belongs to no one, not any more." She turned and walked out. No one stopped her. They were too busy staring at the body of their butcher king, lifeless and bleeding into his own cup. Words spread like wildfire. By nightfall, half the brave companions had fled. The rest cowered in, their rooms, blades drawn, eyes wide. The servants whispered in the corners, and for the first time there was no screaming in the halls. No whips. No boot stomping, just quiet. Harrenhal had gone still, and Arya Stark had become more than a ghost. She
had become legend.
She stayed one more night. Just one. Not out of fear, there was none left in her, not out of comfort. Harrenhal was still cold, still dead, still haunted. But because part of her wanted to see it quiet. Just once. No screaming, no whips, no boots, echoing in terror. Just silence. She sat by the window in one of the broken towers, legs curled under her, needle across her lap. Below, the courtyard lay empty. The fires were low. Tella had brought her a clean cloth, a bit of salted meat, and some bread, before vanishing again into the shadows. No words. Just a look. A look that said, "You're not one of us. You're something
else now." And it was true, Arya Stark had come into Harrenhal as a girl pretending to be no one.
Just another servant, another frightened child swept into the war. She had scrubbed blood from stone. She had been beaten, starved, ignored, and in the end she had become its ruler. Not with a crown, not with men, with death. She stood at dawn, wrapped her cloak tight, and made her way through the halls one last time. They didn't stop her. The remaining soldiers avoided her eyes. The servants whispered her name like a spell. Arya Stark, no longer a ghost, not quite a girl, something between legend and memory. She passed the gates where Ozma had once cursed her name, the yard where the mountain used to hang corpses like warnings, the steps where Vargo Hoat had bled into his own teeth. She paused only once, at the forge. There, on the anvil, sat a bundle of cloth. Inside was a map.
A water skin, dried meat, a small pouch of coin, and a note written in crooked, childlike script. For when you go, we'll say nothing, just remember us. She folded the note and tucked it into her belt. Then she turned toward the river.
Air was sharp, and her breath came out in white clouds as she stepped into the rising mist. Behind her, the towers of Harrenhal loomed like broken teeth against the pale sky. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The castle would remember her, the girl who came in small and left as a storm. She followed the river east. No destination.
No promise of safety, only the road and the cold and the name she carried on her lips, Arya Stark. She whispered it now, not in fear.
Not in hiding, but like it was a sword, because that's what it had become. Somewhere down the line she would hear of the war again, of the Red Wedding, of Winterfell's fall, of her mother's fate, her brother's, and she would keep moving, from shadow to shadow, from name to name. But Harrenhal would always be the place where she stopped being a child and became something else, something the world would never be ready for.